There's an old theory that WCW didn't know how to make stars, and that especially during the Monday Night War era, they simply nicked them from WWE, with ATM Eric using Ted Turner's endless checkbook to bolster his ranks. That is simplistic and not entirely true, of course, because WCW could and did make their own stars. I mean, do you think WWE signed the Giant, Chris Jericho, and others and pushed them from the start because they were nobodies with zero value? Course not. No, WCW did create some stars, but they probably didn't create as many as they should have, considering the deep and talented roster that they had at their disposal. So why didn't it happen? Well, I'd like to say 'cause WCW, but again, that's simplistic. Every case is different, and the reasons for some wrestlers not quite reaching their full potential are various. Besides, it's all just opinion really, isn't it? You'll probably disagree with my assessments, you fool, in which case I'll see you in the comments, where we can argue about what could have been for a company that kicked the bucket over 20 years ago. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are 10 WCW wrestlers who should have been bigger stars. Join us. Number 10, Scott Norton. Scott Flash Norton had everything needed to be a main event world champion caliber performer during the 90s. Well, maybe besides charisma and a strong gimmick and that. But he did achieve that level of stardom, only it happened in Japan and not in the US. A top star in the land of the rising sun, Norton was more of a bit part player in WCW, forming a couple of decent tag teams with Ice Train and Marcus Buff Bagwell. The so-called Vicious and Delicious pairing were part of the New World Order and had some good matches with the likes of the Steiner brothers, but never managed to win the tag straps. The barrel-chested former champion arm wrestler was also a member of the NWO Japan sister stable, and sensing his WCW career on the black and white B team in the States wasn't really going anywhere, decided to focus his efforts in Japan instead. Well-liked backstage and crucially a favourite of WCW president Eric Bischoff, Norton's Japanese commitments are probably the main thing that prevented him getting more of a push in the organisation, where he could have believably been in the world title picture, or if not, the US title mix. Sticking with New Japan proved to be a decent choice, however, since he worked there and achieved sustained success for years after WCW folded. Number 9, Hugh Morris. There was nothing funny about Hugh Morris. Well, apart from the name, Hugh Morris. Humorous. Ha 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 ha. Big Bill DeMott was a well-travelled, rock-solid worker who was surprisingly agile and could perform moves like a picture-perfect moonsault when he arrived in WCW in 1995. After impressing Booker Kevin Sullivan, Morris joined up with the Taskmaster in the Barmy Dungeon of Doom group, which gave him some decent exposure and ensured that he was a regular presence on Nitro. Once that had run its course, Morris slipped down the card, his most notable contribution from that era being the first televised opponent of some greenhorn named Bill Goldberg. Later on, when Vince Russo arrived, Morris got an even worse name, Hugh G. Rection, as the leader of another stable, the comedic Misfits in Action. Hugh G. Rection. Honestly, they should have just called him Big Stiff Willie and got it over with, you know? DeMott got plenty of TV time and won the US title twice, but the company was a sinking ship at this point and nobody was really watching, which is bad luck for Bill because this was probably the biggest and most sustained push of his career. By the time he got to WWE, he was pigeonholed as a jobber to the stars, as well as being broken down from years of ring wars, retiring not too terribly long after. From there, he found his true calling as a full-time bully. Number 8, Blitzkrieg. The WCW undercards were typically full of talented, high-flying masked men from Mexico, providing the thrills, spills, and cutting-edge excitement in the ring that the aging headline crew simply could not. One of the luchadors that caught the eye and began making waves as the new millennium approached wasn't from south of the border, but rather an American masquerading as a luchador. Blitzkrieg made his TV debut in a losing effort against Rey Mysterio, but dazzled everyone in the process. Extremely light on his feet and capable of performing moves not often seen in a major US organization, he began to stand out for the crowd and gain a cult following. Indie sensation Jack Evans cites him as inspiration for becoming a wrestler. His show stealing effort with Juventud Guerrera at Spring Stampede 99 in particular hinted at great things to come, but they never ended up happening. He stuck around and made the occasional appearance on television, but mostly worked house shows and made the decision to leave the business after less than a year on the WCW roster. The man behind the mask, Jay Ross, retired to become a computer technician, where he actually earned more money than he ever did wrestling for America's #2 promotion. Number 7, Crowbar. Devon Storm was a 90s indie standout who had wrestled here, there, and everywhere and done some enhancement work for WCW before finally getting his big break as the company was circling the drain. Repackaged as Crowbar, he was paired up with Daphne and given a featured role, winning the hardcore, cruiserweight, and tag team titles within the space of a year. I mean, this was latter-day WCW and Vince Russo was often involved, so title changes happened as often as sunsets, but it was still an impressive haul nonetheless. And Crowbar was impressive in the ring too, rising above the storyline silliness and having grand matches with a variety of opponents. Sadly, it was too little too late because the company was going down the tubes regardless of how much effort he and a select few others were putting in, and he was released from his contract shortly before the promotion was bought by WWE. He didn't make the jump, instead opting to do the indie thing while continuing to train and work as a physical therapist, which is what he does to this day. Crowbar was a decent character and Storm was committed to it. He was one of the few highlights of those dark WCW days, and while never world champion material or anything, would have made a solid addition to the WWE roster at the time. Number 6, Norman Smiley. Another instance of a performer being a huge deal in one wrestling hotbed but not quite achieving those same heights where the big boys play. Norman Smiley, as Black Magic, rose to the top of Mexico's CMLL, winning their heavyweight title in the process. Originally invited to work there by Conan, what was supposed to be a 1-month stay turned into 5 years, giving Smiley exposure and helping him grow as a performer too. He made his way to WCW as part of their talent exchange agreements, though he found it hard to make an impact in his early days there, becoming little more than a glorified jobber. That all changed thanks to his big wiggle. No, not his big beautiful knob, but the brief gyrating dance he would do during matches. Norman was good value, whether tangling with the cruiserweights or competing in the hardcore division. A fun mid-card act, Smiley perhaps could have been a lot more. He had a great look, a ton of charisma, and a lot of experience in different styles, but I suppose he did find his niche. These days he's working as a trainer and showing recruits at the WWE Performance Center his big wiggle. Sounds like a lawsuit waiting to happen if you ask me. Number 5, Canyon. Who better than Canyon? Well, when it came to having a passion and drive to succeed in the wrestling business, not many. Chris Canyon was a classic case of a wrestler trying to find the thing that worked best for them. His construction worker tag team, Men at Work, didn't have legs, but Mortis was an improvement. The Mortal Kombat-inspired character wasn't a long-term gig, but a place in Raven's flock did have potential. Once the flock thing was over, the Jersey Triad offered another opportunity for Canyon to shine, which he did. The innovator of offense was constantly coming up with new original moves or sequences and trying everything he could to have the best match or steal the show in some way, even if it meant being thrown off the top of that ridiculous triple cage. Canyon had the look, size, experience, and ambition to be a top star in the business, but other forces worked against him and he never managed to penetrate the glass ceiling. His WCW career was nothing to scoff at. He had some cracking matches and moments and held the tag team titles, but it could have been so much more had the stars aligned. Number 4, Alex Wright. There are prodigies, there are wonder kids, and then there is Das Wunderkind. The second generation grappler made his professional debut in his native Germany at the tender age of 16 before gaining further experience overseas in Japan. The dancing babyface made his way to WCW while still not of legal drinking age and impressed in lower card bouts with the likes of Jean-Paul Levesque and Brian Pillman. Obviously talented, he gained fans in the locker room, including Ric Flair, who was supposedly one of his biggest supporters. Good looking, in great shape, hell of an athlete, there was a lot to enjoy about Wright's work, but the techno-loving German gimmick wasn't doing him any favors. As a different character, Wright may have made a bigger splash and stood out more in WCW's burgeoning cruiserweight scene. He was also gangly and green, but kept plugging away and working hard and became a cruiserweight and TV champion. Eventually, he changed his look and tried out a new gimmick, trading in the techno for industrial music, shaving his head and going by the name Berlin. It was a unique presentation, augmented by the fact he was accompanied and protected by the Wall, but it didn't set the world on fire, and he remained mired in the mid-card until WCW died, teaming with the ever-objectionable Disco Inferno in the company's last days. Number 3, Brad Armstrong. In any other line of work, being really good at your job usually results in career development, but that's not always the case in wrestling, and certainly not the case for the super smooth Brad Armstrong. A natural in the ring and capable of making just about anyone else look much better than they actually were, Brad got tagged with the dreaded hell of a hand label, and never became the star that his talent seemed to suggest that he would be. A wrestler's wrestler, Armstrong was a favourite of many of his colleagues and showed occasional flashes of brilliance, but was hindered by several rotten gimmicks. Arachnaman, the Candyman, Fantasia, and Buzzkill all went down about as well as a fart in a lift, and without a colourful costume or wacky character, Brad was just a little, well, bland, despite being a reliable presence who you knew was going to give you a good match. With the right gimmick or push or manager or storyline or something, Brad Armstrong could have been taken to the next level, but it never seemed to be on the cards. He still had a commendable career and was on WCW's books for over a decade, but should have really done a lot more in that time. Number 2, Wrath. You don't want to admit it now for obvious reasons, but Brian Clark was pretty effing cool in his 90s prime. A fun mid-card attraction in WWE as Adam Bomb, he left the company after falling out of favour and down the card, signing with WCW in 1997, having previously worked there years earlier as the Night Stalker. It was a new gimmick this time around, as he was rechristened Wrath and put with Mortis, Glacier and Ernest Miller in an obvious attempt to cash in on the popularity of Mortal Kombat. Once that was over with, he changed up his look, got himself a sweet new pump handle slam finisher, and embarked on a winning streak. According to Clark, the winning streak was supposed to lead to a big showdown with Goldberg in a battle of the undefeated, which sounds logical enough. But this is WCW, so logic be damned, and before that could happen, he was randomly sacrificed to Kevin Nash on Nitro as a way to promote Big Sexy's Starrcade match with The Man. And people say backstage politics and senseless creative decisions helped ruin this company. Wrath would never regain that momentum, but did enjoy a career resuscitation when he was paired with Bryan Adams in the tag team Chronic with a capital K. 2 capital Ks. Number 1, Saturn. We all like to have a good laugh at the confused hardnut who was in love with a mop, but before he became a walking punchline, Perry Saturn was touted as a future world champ. Stocky and with a hard man rep, Big Pez was able to do any style and do it well. From Japanese strong style to high flying to brawling and everything in between, he had proven himself as a great tag wrestler as a member of the Eliminators and a worthy stablemate during his early WCW days as a member of the Flock. He went solo for a while after butting heads with Raven and leaving the Cult, but not long after joined back up with him in a tag team before moving on to the Revolution. Saturn always looked good and worked hard, but he wasn't content in WCW with either the backstage politics, creative, or his place in the mid-card. So he, along with Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, and Dean Malenko, engineered their release and jumped to WWE. Though he was a tag team and TV champion in Turnerland, Perry had the potential to do and be a lot more. So there you have it, our number 1 WCW wrestler who should have been a bigger star, Perry Saturn. You're welcome.